Well, thank you very much for taking the time to come out tonight. I recognise that it's a busy time of the year and everybody's got something else on, and we've received quite a large number of apologies from people who would have liked to have been here in one capacity or another. But I do thank you people who have taken the time to be here, and I hope when it does come to question time that I'm able to answer your questions. This is very much about the office of the member for New England rather than the member for New England. And all of my staff, bar one, are in the room tonight, and I won't go through them, but I do thank them for the work that they've put in over the years. And some of them, Lou's been with me since 1991, so I think he'd be probably the only political staffer that's actually been in two hung parliaments. I particularly thank him, but I thank all of the others for the work they've put in over the years. They've done extraordinary work, and this particular term has probably been more taxing on them in some senses than it has been on me, particularly in terms of some of the vitriolic stuff that rolls in occasionally, and particularly did early on in this term of Parliament. What I'd like to do tonight, if I could, is give a bit of a report card on the last couple of years, a hung parliament at federal level. What's that actually meant? You know, obviously different people hear different things, and different people hear things they may want to hear, and others hear things they don't want to hear. But this particular parliament has been an extraordinary parliament to be in. Every parliament's a privilege. But this one has been a particularly interesting one, and there's a number of things that I'll go through in terms of why I think it has been particularly interesting. So I'll talk about the hung parliament, what it's meant locally, and I don't do that to try and say, well, this is the best thing since sliced bread, we've achieved this, this and this. The local issues are very important. I'm not demeaning them, but I think the federal parliament is very important in terms of policy, and I'd like to spend some time on the influence I think that I may have been able to have had, and others on the crossbench have had in terms of policy. Not only the things that have happened, but the things that have been stopped from happening. So if there's any questions on those sorts of issues, I'd attempt to answer them. What I'd like to go to after that is the sort of future politics. You know, what can we learn from a hung parliament in terms of the country people? You know, I've lived in the country all my life. My predecessors have come from roughly this area, around Grendai, Werris Creek, for both sides of the family for over 100 years. I'm not one of those who wants to die on the coast. I'll die where I live. Not too soon, I hope, but I want to live my life in the country, west of the range. And a lot of the policy issues that I've tried to address over the years have been, I guess if there's a thread through them, it's about, you know, what do people who actually live out here want to try and gain from this? What can we do better in our parliaments? How can we get some of the issues across that people have struggled with over the years that the various governments have removed from them? Then I'd like to talk about this sort of mythology that's out there in terms of the independent brand and what all that means and doesn't mean. And then we'll probably talk about a couple of the major issues that are coming up next year, and then move to questions. If there's specific questions, and I think most people in this room would be well aware that my office has always been open to all comers. If there's specific individual questions about issues that have particular concern to individuals, this is probably not the night for them, but I'm more than happy to try and address any of the more general issues. John, I don't see a clock. That worries me. I haven't worn one since 1988, so What time?
I'll lend you one if I can get it back.
lend me one. Is it a good watch? It's a quarter past, okay. Well, you might keep an eye on me in terms of time. Now, what have we got out of a hung parliament? There's a number of things that everybody will think about what this parliament's been about and what it's achieved. And what I intend to do, and this is the second one of these meetings, I intend to hold a series of them across the electorate. So tonight's meeting will more be concentrating on the sort of Tamworth region in a sense. The Armidale meeting was about issues that directly concern the people around Armidale, and that doesn't mean that I'm trying to sort of short sheet the rest of the electorate. And I will talk about various issues that have occurred in various other communities, but for the purposes of tonight, I'm assuming that most people are from within, sort of 100 k's of Tamworth and are probably more interested in what's been happening around here rather than what might have been happening in Inverell or other parts of Tenterfield and other parts of the electorate. But on a local level, I think some of the achievements of this particular parliament have actually been in dollar figures coming into to the electorate. When you look at the various major ticket items, I guess, that many of you probably remember, the Commonwealth government, and some of it through the nature of a hung parliament, the arrangements that were made in terms of negotiations with Julia Gillard and Tony Abbott, some of those issues were able to be locked in because of the nature of the particular parliament. Some of them, to the credit of the former government, were probably going to happen anyway, and but we were able to make sure they did. I remember the first hung parliament I was in back in 1991, the courthouse police station had been promised for about 5 or 6 elections, I think, and one of the things that we were able to achieve at that particular hung parliament was to make sure it was actually built. Not promised, but actually built. I think that's one of the sort of strong advantages of being in a hung parliament and holding the balance of power. But I've got some numbers here, and I'll run through them fairly quickly. They are significant in terms of various communities. But there again, you're not only in a parliament, particularly a federal parliament, to achieve things locally. You're there to have an influence on policy, and I'd just like you to bear that in mind. But I'll give you 2 numbers if I could, because essentially most of these things would not have happened had not the Commonwealth put some money in. And if you go right back to the Entertainment Centre, the Equine Centre, a lot of other major constructions in the city that haven't occurred in this particular parliament, but the real initiator in a lot of those were the locals and the various state and Commonwealth governments came in at various times. Some of these are a little bit different. The Commonwealth has actually driven most of them in terms of a significant contribution, and hence generated the opportunity for these things to happen. And I'll go through them relatively quickly. The Chaffey Dam upgrade, which is obviously critical to this community, $43 million, of which the Commonwealth contributed 17 million, but if the 17 million wasn't there, it wouldn't have happened. Barrable Water, 20 million, which the Commonwealth contributed 7, Tamworth Regional Council and the state government. A very good arrangement, that one, in terms of the 3 levels working together. Tamworth Base Hospital, 220 million, 120 million from the Commonwealth. The Cancer Clinic, 41 million, 31 million from the Commonwealth. The Coaldale Community Initiative, and I do congratulate the council. This is some funding that's come out of a program to create better cities. And Council put an excellent proposal together, in my view, to generate some funding, all Commonwealth essentially, to improve the amenity in Coaldale and hopefully have some consequences in terms of the people that live there. So there's 10 million there. The trade training schools, 33 million, that's all Commonwealth. The Superdome is 10, it's all Commonwealth. The University Department of Rural Health. One of the great success stories, unsung in my view, is that the University Department of Rural Health that is based at the hospital, has been for many years, not many years, a decade. It is the reason we have a medical school in Armidale now, and that medical school has an outreach into Tamworth, Taree and other, Armidale of course, obviously, and other areas. Absolutely critical to the training of doctors. And a major part of the upgrade of the Tamworth Base Hospital is about training future doctors and allied professionals. It's not just about, as some people may think, about building better bricks and mortar so that patients are in a new building. It's about honing in on the need to train doctors in the country. So we've got this very, very good relationship between Newcastle University, the University of New England, the University Department of Rural Health, and I think it's working extraordinarily well together. So there was $20 million came out of the arrangements that were put in place with Julia Gillard to actually fund accommodation both in Tamworth and in Armidale for those trainee doctors and allied professionals. And that's currently being built up there at the moment, and some of that money's gone into a recent table hands clinical school in Armidale as well, which added again to another bucket of federal funding that's allowed that table hands clinical school to go ahead. The schools had something like 76 million. The University of New England had some funding recently, 29 million from the Education Infrastructure Fund, and I'll talk about it a little bit more in terms of broader policy in a minute. And it's part of a $46 million upgrade and building new buildings and a whole range of allied arrangements to try and put agriculture right at the forefront of the University of New England. And most of you probably don't know what's going on up there in a lot of ways, but Armidale and the university in particular have really grabbed hold of the national broadband concept, and they're developing up a whole range of technologies which are quite extraordinary, not the least of which are some of the building blocks that agriculture into the future will have, and combining that with a number of the CRCs, what's that stand for, John? Cooperative Research Centres, which are agriculturally based, and the CSIRO at Chiswick near Uralla. There's some incredible activity happening, and some of this money, this $46 million, will probably be one of I think probably the biggest build that the university's had in any one hit. Some of which will be in Tamworth in terms of the campus here, but a lot of it will be in terms of outreach through the national broadband network and a whole range of other things related to agriculture. Now there's a range of other things that have occurred within the electorate, and I could, there's pages of them that I could go through, but I don't intend to do that. I think a couple of things of significance, and I know there's a few people from the sort of broader region here, some of the federal funding that went towards the Namoy water study. I think that's important in terms of creating some degree of objectivity in terms of the science as to what's happening on the floodplain. And the other big one, I think, 290 million is being spent as we speak in overhauling the infrastructure and rail over the Murrumbidgee Range and passing loops and a whole range of other things that, where there's a major investment of federal funding. And And that piece of infrastructure, along with the broadband infrastructure, I think, and the medical strands and some of the educational strands that I think are the sort of building blocks in terms of education that we can look forward to in the future. So if you're into numbers and add those up, there's about $812 million of expenditure there, roughly in this area, of which $645 million is actual federal dollars. Some of it's value added by the states, and in some cases the council. There's a range of other things that have occurred in sort of Gunnedah and other areas that, when I have a meeting in Gunnedah, I'll talk about those, or Glen Innes, I'll talk about those issues. So the second area I'd like to talk about, if I could, is really the policy area. And at the end of the day, there's two things that you're elected to do. One is represent the people of that electorate, and two is to have some input into the policy initiatives of the Parliament of the day. And there's a number of ways you can actually do that, and it doesn't just rely on being in a hung parliament either. Our system of government is based on two houses of Parliament, the House of Representatives and the Senate. The Senate is probably hung most of the time. Some might suggest it should be hung all the time, but the way the numbers work, the population, rightly or wrongly, tends to put a handbrake on the government of the day. There's only been a few occasions in recent history where the government of the day has actually held a majority in the Senate, so that any legislation that it thinks is a good idea can actually occur through the Senate. John Howard had it, and it was probably part of his downfall, in a sense. I think the little bit of over-exuberance and that actually led to thinking that, well, we can push anything through the Senate, which you could because it had numbers, but the population sort of responded to some of those initiatives. Some people thought they were great, others didn't, but he lost office. So the Senate at the next election is probably still going to be hung. No one will have a majority there. And if you look at a number of the polls, one of the growth areas since the last poll has actually been in the independent or others column, and the Greens have slightly gone up. So there's about 25%, 23 to 25% of the population are actually looking at voting for somewhere else other than the majors. And that reflects very much in the Senate. Now, I might talk about that a little bit later. The point that I was making there, but in a hung parliament, or any parliament, you have the capacity to either deal with people, as a member of parliament, you have the capacity to deal with people in the House of Representatives or the Senate. And I have a very good relationship with a number of people in the Senate on both sides of parliament and the crossbenchers as well. So it's not as simple as some people paint in the media that someone wins government, they suddenly have carte blanche in terms of what they can actually do in terms of legislative arrangements. So I think if I come back to some of the climate change issues and particularly the National Broadband Network a bit later, I think you'll see the linkage there that becomes important. So in terms of policy, the issues that I would like to think I've had some input into, and please don't think this is some sort of ego trip, but one of the issues that I really scored highly in terms of the determination of who would govern, given that it was a hung parliament, and Bob Catter, Rob Oakeshott and I had to essentially make a decision as to could one side govern, could the other side govern, or should we go back to the polls? One of the defining policy initiatives that was out there was the National Broadband Network. I believed, and I still believe, that it is probably the one piece of technology this century that will revolutionise the capacity to live anywhere. And when you say live anywhere, that means you become cost effective living in the country, because it's more expensive to live in the city. It's one of those things that demolishes distance as being a disadvantage, and remoteness as being a disadvantage, and smallness as being a disadvantage of actually living in the country. And there's a whole range of short-term issues out there in terms of whether it's too dear, too good, too bad, I shouldn't have it, don't care, don't want to watch movies. There's all of those issues sort of revolving around the place. But there's no doubt in my mind, and we're getting feedback from many people, including the outskirts of Tamworth now, that many people are on fixed wireless. The improvements that they're getting, many people in Armidale are on fibre optic cable, and over a 10-year period, the fibre optic cable will be rolled out to the major centres. Those centres over, I think it's 1,000 homes, 1,000 households. And over and above that, the fixed wireless system will be put in place, and in the very remote areas there'll be 2 satellites that will cater for the internet services. Now, there was a lot of debate about whether this was good, bad or ugly, and whether we should have it or not. And I'm a friend of Malcolm Turnbull's. I consider myself a friend, and we talk quite often. Malcolm's the Shadow Minister for Communications, and a very bright man in my view. But Malcolm at one stage was talking about, you've got to have a benefit cost analysis to make sure that this is of benefit to the community. You've got to present a business case. Well, the business case was presented. It wasn't a benefit cost analysis, but it shows about a 7% return on investment to government. Bearing in mind that the NBN Co, which is the company that will run this, is essentially its major shareholder is the government, and there will be probably, I think, about 30% of the shareholding will be the actual share market itself. But the major shareholder, the controller, will be the government. So in terms of how it will operate and the issues that Malcolm was raising, that there's no benefit cost analysis, therefore we should do one if we go ahead with it. I was having a yarn to Malcolm there one day, and I just made the point to him, what if 100,000 Australians are able to stay in their home 1 year longer because of real-time technology? And this goes to the issue of why you need the fibre to the house. You know, some people would suggest, the market will deliver it to the street, and if you particularly want it, you can hook up to it. You can dig your own ditch and plug in. And bearing in mind that we're moving through this sort of baby boomer hump, where we're going to have this extraordinary demand for aged care facilities for a period of probably 20 years. And then it'll start to drop off as the baby boomers go to somewhere else. And I'll probably be one of them. So we have this scenario that's sitting there, and governments have been looking at it. Peter Costello looked at this some time ago in terms of the cost, the ageing generation, how we're going to pay for this sort of stuff. So it's not a new issue. We've known it's coming. It's how you deal with it and who pays for it and how you pay for it that becomes important, and how you spread the payment of it. But under previous thought waves, I guess, people would say, well, let's just go out and build a whole range of aged care centres, and when we don't need them, we'll just start to close them down. So you've got this enormous capital outlay, an industry is built in terms of aged care, and then and particularly if the people are trying to make a profit out of them, they get themselves into all sorts of circumstances in the fade down period. So I said to Malcolm, we're going to go through this really hard period where there's going to be big demands on aged care services. What if the National Broadband Network connected to the home, so it's real-time stuff? You can see I'm right on top of it. what if that means 100,000 Australians can stay in their home for 1, 2 or 3 years longer, because they can have direct contact, not only be monitored in terms of their health, blood pressure and other things, they can be monitored in terms of their whereabouts in their community, in their home. You can have this sort of electronic security blanket in a sense. You're able to be in contact with loved ones in real time, 1,000 k's away, or your pharmacist or your doctor or your community nurse. What if that gives people the confidence to stay in their home, which most people do, much longer? What does that mean in terms of the benefit-cost analysis? And I remember Malcolm saying, oh, he said, well, if you fed that in there as one of the variables, you'd get a certain result. And if you have 200,000 or 300,000 that can stay there for 1, 2 or 3 years' time, the numbers suddenly become extraordinary. That's just one aspect of where NBN will be able to help in an economic sense as well as, in that case, a health sense. But in terms of the individual, a real sense of being able to stay where they live. So I just ask you to, when you hear all the various arguments about cost and whatever else, most of the things that we'll use it for haven't even been invented yet. But I like to use the issue, and some people say, oh, it's going to cost about $40 billion to build. That's a big amount of money. But we sold the old technology, the Telstra technology, the copper wire technology, we, the government, the people, we sold it for $51 billion. Now, I would have thought, and the cost probably won't stay at 40, but even if it gets out to 50 or even to 60, but say it's, just for argument's sake, in today's dollars it stays at 40. Well, I would have thought if you could trade your old car, 100 years old, in for more than you buy the new one, it probably wasn't a bad sort of a deal. And that's the way I look at it. But the major beneficiaries of this are going to be country people. Part of the negotiations we had with the government were that there would be equalised wholesale prices across the nation, similar to the postage stamp. Normally what would happen in a country environment is if you're furthest from the big end of town, you'll pay more. We've been able to take that out of the equation and make sure that country people, when they get access, is actually they pay the same wholesale price. I'm not talking about retail price. Retail is a competitive market. But in terms of the retailers accessing the railway line or the fibre, they will all get it at the same price, whether they're in Bondi or Burke. So NBN is of critical importance. One of the other things that this Parliament's been good for, in my view, and that I'd like to think we've had some input, and I say we because a lot of the input I have has come directly from people in the Parliament. The Health and Hospital Fund. It was set up a few years ago to try and stimulate the economy after the global financial crisis. So it was in a program called One Nation, or nation building. And what Rob Oakeshott and I were able to do was, on the formation of government, say to them, okay, and both Tony Abbott and Julia Gillard admitted that the country had missed out. In our discussions, they said, yeah, no, we know how it works, but you guys have missed out. We'll make reparations. Anyway, in terms of the Health and Hospital Fund, there was $1.8 billion left in it, out of, I think, about $5 billion that had come out of the stimulus, the nation-building package, which was to stimulate the economy. What we were able to do there was guarantee that 100% of it went to country people. Previously, and I've done the numbers on this, 13.6% went to country people. 13.6. We were able to ring fence the ground for country people, 1.8 billion, 135 health services across regional Australia benefit out of that. Tamworth was a major beneficiary. The $120 million for the hospital came out of that, and I think there was a 1.1 million for some diagnostic equipment as well. So Tamworth has done very well out of that. Now, why has it done well? Is that because Tony Windsor was able to pull a string, or why? Tamworth was ready to go. Tamworth was ready to go. The people in the health service had done the work, they'd done the numbers, they were what's called shovel ready, and to their great credit, they were able to take advantage of the opportunity. And I think there's a real lesson in that for country people. Too often we sit back and say, well, I'll apply when something comes along. Quite often, by the time you put your application form together, it's gone. It's the bloke who was ready that's been able to take advantage of the opportunity. 1.8 billion has been expended now. We've seen the politics that's been played in Armidale in terms of trying to access this fund, and the New South Wales Minister for Health actually wouldn't allow the Armidale proposal to go forward, to even be in the race to get some of the money. And now she's demanding that we suddenly create another one so the Commonwealth can pay for it. Such is politics. The Education Investment Fund, the University of New England, been able to take advantage of that. It was $500 million. There again, we were able to ring fence that for country people. No cities, it's not saying we're against cities, but we were able to present a case where the cities have got a greater share of the cake. And this Parliament was going to be an opportunity to resurrect some of those neglected issues. $500 million, the University of New England, it was only announced a couple of weeks ago, got 29 million of that to go towards this 46 million proposal in terms of developing up agricultural research and teaching, etc. And Tamworth will be part of that as well. The Murray-Darling, I think, was a big issue that this Parliament, the hung nature of it, the regional people having the balance of power, and I was quite involved with that through the regional Australia committee that I chair. I think we got a very different result to had it been left with either side in a majority government. I've got absolutely no doubt about that. And I know there's people not happy with it, but I think the outcome is far better, and I can get into the technicalities if people want to ask it, but I won't now. The outcome is far better by having country people having the balance of power than not having it. The minerals rent resource tax, well, that's had a bit of a checkered history, but there's an amount of money that actually has been made available, irrespective of whether the tax works or not, because the resource boom seems to be softening, and that will be made available, $200 million to an independent scientific committee to look at the issues of large coal mining and coal seam gas issues, particularly where they relate to the water issue. The Liverpool Plains is a classic case, not the only one, but I think it's probably a major example of where there's need for an injection of funds to try and get some objective science rather than the rather crazy state government policy that was around with the Labor Party when it was in power in New South Wales, and we're probably not much better with the coalition in terms of that policy initiative. Climate change, clean energy, I could talk for hours on that, and maybe someone will have a go at me about the carbon tax, but I'll just give you one example. I think there's about 3 people or companies in the electorate will pay carbon tax. There might be 4. All of them will probably, almost certainly, be able to use the receipts of those who pay carbon tax to avoid it. And I'll just give you a little snapshot of an example which is related to here, the Cargill Abattoir, which is now owned by Tees. What they've done, they've had issues in the past, as all abattoirs have, with their waste. So they've actually built a biogas plant. Now that biogas plant is only quite a small one, it's only $1 million. But they'll be able to use their waste which used to be a cost to them, and convert that waste back into energy, which, as we all know, is going up. They're an interesting example because this $1 million, they've been able to get a grant from the government for $330,000. With that grant, they've built this biogas plant. Their words, not mine. Their emissions will be reduced by 5%, which is positive in terms of the climate change debate. Their natural gas consumption will be reduced by 25%, which is a positive. They will save, in terms of energy costs, $330,000 a year. So they've actually got a government-assisted investment that has a payback period of 2 years. And then they'll start to make, compared to the opportunity cost, compared to what they would have been had they not addressed the waste issue, they'll be $330,000 plus better off each year. Now, I know there's many in the farming community say, oh, this thing's going to it'll blow us all apart, it's the worst thing that could have happened. We're dealing with a number of abattoirs, and the reason you're not hearing the meat industry sector squealing over this is that the smart money is moving. What they're doing, and I won't tell you who they are, but you'll be hearing of them pretty soon. What they're doing is actually using some of the clean energy fund money from the major polluters, particularly the power stations, and using that to invest in these biogas or biomethane conversion plants. And there's technology out there now, and anybody who knows the abattoir industry would know that there's a lot of waste, whether it be offal or the normal blood and other things, mess that occurs. So in one case we're looking at, and these figures are being checked out now in a pilot model. One case we're looking at, the particular abattoir goes from paying carbon tax, having about 33,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalent emissions. And I think it's 30,000 tonnes you get hit, isn't it? 25,000 tonnes you get hit. They'll be able to reduce their emissions down to about 1,000 tonnes CO2 equivalents. A massive reduction, no carbon tax. They'll be able to take advantage of the Clean Energy Fund, which is a massive fund, which has been financed through the so-called carbon tax. And they will actually be able to remove themselves from the grid, be able to produce all their power, they'll be able to produce biofertiliser, which creates another business, and out the other end will come essentially potable water. So rather than have an EPA, an Environmental Protection Authority issue on their hands, these people are going to be able to move into a number of other businesses, all of which are profitable, and very importantly, make themselves immune from the grid. And some of them believe, and I think they'll be probably right, there's been a lot of work done on this, that they may well be able to reduce their unit costs of production by up to 25%. Now, if that's not a good investment, I don't know what is. All of these things take time, so I don't apologise for being involved very much in this sort of clean energy / climate change debate, because living in the country, and for years we've been looking for opportunities to value add to what we do. There's some good examples just in those couple of cases. But also to find out other things that the country communities can do that can drought-proof them in a sense. What are the things we can do other than just farming? And I think a lot of the clean energy initiatives are going to sort of help drive that. I better push on. This particular parliament is the first one to have a regional Australia minister that's just been responsible for regional Australia. The first one to have a regional Australia committee. Never had one before. If that doesn't say something, I don't know what does. I mentioned the Independent Scientific Committee, that's been put in place. We are one of the issues in terms of the formation of government was to have a referendum on local government constitutional recognition. Local government seem to have gone to sleep a bit on this. They seem to think, oh, we don't think the public will agree with it. I'm on a committee that's looking at that at the moment, but if you don't have a go, there's only one answer. They won't agree with it. So I'm a bit, for 20 years, local government has been saying to me and other representatives, we want to be constitutionally recognised so that we're not just at the behest of the state governments, that we can directly draw money from the Commonwealth, like Roads to Recovery and those very successful programs. So I'm a bit sort of at sea as to where local government actually is on this at the moment, and I'd encourage anybody that's involved in local government. There's an opportunity here to actually drive home the issue. You haven't had it before, and some of the people in local government are suggesting that, oh, well, let's leave it to another time. If you leave it this time, you won't get another time. I mentioned earlier on that, and I'll just give 3 examples. A hung parliament's not only about what you achieve, it's what you stop. What are the negatives that governments would have done? And some of that, I think, relates to the Murray-Darling, but just 3 specific examples that would have occurred in a normal majority in Parliament. The rural financial councillors, which are very valuable to many people, that would have gone. If you asked any of them, they'd say that they were on the chopping block. That's worth about $5 million, I guess. But caring for our country, if you were doing a Wayne Swan and heading for a surplus, caring for our country, which is a lot of environmental programs that the government's funded over the years, it would have gone. That's about $2 billion. It's there for another 5 years now. It's locked in, irrespective of who the next Parliament is. Country people will be able to access that. And one that essentially came out of Inverell in a way that when the negotiations are going on in terms of the multi-party climate change committee looking at renewable energy, the carbon debate, long distance road transport was taken out. The Greens wanted that in. That was taken out, and that's something of about $2.5 billion over the forward estimates. And I'm quite happy to talk about some others if people want to go there. I'm just a bit cognizant of the time. What's the future? Yeah, you can see some of the things that hung Parliament has achieved, and a lot of the things that do go on are not on the floor of the House. There's a lot of meetings, a lot of negotiation. As there should be. The same happened with the Nick Greiner hung Parliament back in the 90s, as is happening now. Rather than sort of do the prima donna stuff, a lot of the hard work is done in terms of negotiation, discussion. Things are taken out of legislation, not directly in the House of the Parliament, although occasionally that does happen, but mostly, and some legislation doesn't even get there if they get the whiff that they're not going to get the numbers to get it through. But one of the key points that I hope that comes out is a legacy of this particular Parliament, irrespective of whether I'm re-elected or not, is what do we learn in terms of country representation from this sort of circumstance? Some people say, oh, this is, particularly city people, if you listen to the shock jocks, they're rabbiting on about it because they're essentially city people. How dreadful it's all been, and because they haven't been able to control it. And the executive of government hasn't been able to control it either. Personally, I'd say that's a good thing, not a bad thing, but what are the sorts of lessons that we can learn? One thing has become fairly evident to me, that there's never been a hung Parliament, there's never been a Parliament since Federation where a country member hasn't held the balance of power. In the first half of the 20th century, there were quite a lot of hung parliaments, I think there were about 14 of them. Then the major city-based parties woke up to it and said, well, the only way we're going to keep control of this show is actually form parties. No word party in the Constitution. We'll form these parties and then bring a few of these people in and promise them a few things in terms of white cars and ministerial jobs. That way we can keep control of it. This hung parliament stuff, not good for us, you know, we're the big end of town, we're the city people. So during that first half of that century, we saw a number of hung parliaments, smaller groups, independents, etc. For the last 50 or 60 years, we haven't. Mainly because most of the country members have been trapped in city-based majority parties. So they have been able to play the tennis match. You know, you have it for 8 years, then give it to us. But essentially the same people run the show. What this Parliament has been able to indicate is that that doesn't necessarily have to be the case all the time. A lot of people, particularly country people, I've been rabbiting on about this for 20 years, they assume that because they've got 30% of the vote, they'll never have a majority, therefore they've got to be tied to one of the city-based majority parties. What they don't look at is the influence that the Greens have had with something like 7% of the vote in the Senate. Country people have got 30%. They can, and they have, had the potential ever since Federation to determine who governs every time. Not just aberrations such as this one, every time. That they've got themselves, most of the players have got themselves locked into this system where they give in to the majority. Our democracy works on majorities, but the way a party room works is a good country member will go in and argue his case, and his city cousins will say, "No, well, that's all very good, we understand that, we'll put it to the vote," and he gets outnumbered, and then he has to come out and say, "Well, I put the case, but majority rules, I can't get a Guernsey." So it weakens the bargaining power, and then if someone has some degree of oomph in terms of push, they'll be quickly made a minister. So it removes their capacity to represent their constituents more so than in the past. So what I hope comes out of this particular parliament is that country people actually recognise their potential and use their political muscle strategically. Not abuse it, but use it. And that's what I've attempted to do in terms of this particular parliament. And I think whether you look at numbers or various policy things, it has had an impact. Not just me, the others as well. But I think we've got to look at that and work out whether that's a better way to go or whether you just climb back in with a city-based majority and receive the gifts occasionally. Political competition is what actually drives politics. Political subservience, loyalty, doesn't, regrettably. The loyal seats, whether they be Labor in some of the Western Sydney and Melbourne seats, where normally the elections are determined, are treated abominably by both sides. Western parts of New South Wales or Queensland, treated abominably by both sides, because they know where they are. They're not in the game in terms of being strategic in terms of their vote. The Western Australian Nationals, the first political party that I've seen that actually started to think that way. The hung parliament in Western Australia, there still is. They started to deal with both sides. Brendan Grills, who I've met, and I was going to go over and campaign for him actually, but he decided to sit down with the Labor Party and the Liberal Party and talk to them about issues and delivery. And at one stage he was looking very seriously at going with the Labor Party and eventually went with the Liberal Party. The fact is now that he's out there looking where he can use their vote, country vote, strategically for the future. So I'd urge you to have some thoughts about that. I am coming to the end, but I can't leave this meeting without talking about this so-called trashing of the independent brand that's been out there, that this Parliament has somehow trashed some sort of independent brand. First of all, there is no brand. all members of Parliament are independents, or should be. And they can join factions and other groups, but there is no mention of the word independent or party in our Constitution. So they are all elected as representatives of various constituencies. Some can only get in there because they associate with others and hence get dragged into the building. I'm offended at this issue, and it's Richard Torvey that's raised it, that the independent brand, in a sense, has been trashed. And I'd just like to talk about a few things that relate to that in terms of trashing. Rob Oakeshott and I went into a 17-day period trying to find a way through, in a federal sense, a solution to an issue where neither of the major parties had a majority. We established a process and we worked through that with both Tony Abbott and Julia Gillard. And we both took that process very seriously. And Bob Catter was with us for a while too. And I don't know if Bob took it that seriously, but we worked as a bit of a team together so that we wouldn't have to have meeting after meeting. We wouldn't all have to have three lots of meetings. And we met with a lot of people. We took it very seriously. And the decision wasn't an easy one at the end of it. But I think what people don't seem to know is that at the end of that, given that the major players, both Tony Abbott and Julia Gillard, did not want to go back to the polls, and I would have been absolutely assassinated. Someone had been arguing about the balance of power for 20 years. If I'd said, it's all too hard, we'll go back to the polls. So we had to make a decision between the two of them. Now, if Rob Oakeshott had gone Liberal, or I'd gone Liberal, and he'd gone Labor, or I'd gone Labor, the result would have been another election, given that Bob Catter had decided that he was tied to, or was going to go with the Liberal vote. So we made a decision that on balance we believed that the Labor Party had a better opportunity of actually operating a parliament in difficult circumstances for the 3-year term, and that Tony Abbott would struggle. The very nature of the man, he'd struggle. He's more of a majority operator rather than negotiator. I think you can see that in the personalities of the two different people. So that decision was made, and I've got to say that if I was faced with the same decision, given the behaviour of both of them, and they've been brilliant on both sides, that I'd probably make exactly the same decision. Now, part of the reason for saying that is that Tony Abbott, he said he would govern for 3 years, but it was obvious through the leaks from Bronwyn Bishop and others, even recently, where they've said, well, we would never have stayed the distance. As soon as we got past Barry O'Farrell's election, we would have called it all off. Now, some people may have wanted that, but our task was to see there'd been an election. We didn't ask for our own parliament. There'd been an election. Who could actually operate in that environment for that particular period? And I think that this particular parliament will probably last till October next year. But during that 17-day period, and I respect Richard Torvey's right to run, and I wish him well in terms of running. I have great admiration for his parents. I know them well. I love his wife, and I've seen his kids. But I have absolutely no respect for him as an individual. And I'll tell you why. During that 17-day period, Richard Torvey was ringing members of the Labor Party, Tony Burke, Chris Bowen, others, acting as an agent for me. During that 17-day period, I didn't talk to Richard Torvey. I tested him some years ago in terms of whether you could actually trust him with confidential information. And he failed some years back. He was ringing, and there's some people in this room that he was ringing during the 17-day period, saying, why isn't Tony ringing me for advice? I made no contact with him. He was ringing Labor people. Tony Burke had been in the New South Wales Parliament. Chris Bowen had been the Chief of Staff for Carl Scully, that used to set up a lot of the little deals that went on on the northern tablelands about a new bridge or a new road. He was ringing them, and they were ringing him. And Torbay was telling them, I've got Windsor for you, and I'm still working on Oak Truck. I've got Windsor for you, and I'm still working on Oak Truck. Now, I'm absolutely personally disgusted that someone would represent that sort of message when they haven't been spoken to on a critical issue like the determination of government. And what makes matters worse, that when that was made public, what I've just said, this has been public for quite some time, Senator Williams of the National Party said, well, what's wrong with that? He was ringing us too. Got Windsor for you. I'm still working on Oak Truck. What an extraordinary thing to do. So I am absolutely offended that that sort of activity was occurring. And I am offended that this so-called independent brand is suddenly trashed in his view, and they all should be thrown out, and we really need to go back to a city-based majority arrangement. Let me tell you a couple of other things. Up till last year, after the O'Farrell government was elected, only a bit over a year ago, for the whole time that Richard had been an independent member of the New South Wales Parliament, he was on the internal Labor Party computer arrangements, which they have to pay for. Been there all the time. So some people should start to ask some questions about the integrity of what's going on here. If the National Party can't do better than that, it's just to get rid of me. You know, I'm incidental, but I think it says an enormous amount about them. And I'll tell you one other thing. And Richard will deny all of this, of course. And some people might like to do some investigative journalism. During the 2007 election, state election, it's the one the Labor Party should have lost, that they scraped over. But if you think back to that period of time, it looked as though Barry O'Farrell would win. The second option could have been a hung parliament, or the third option was a Labor win. The Labor Party sat down with Richard Torbay, and he offered to do a deal before the election that if it was a hung parliament, that he would support them, Labor, and potentially bring some of the independents, this brand that he's talking about, across with him to ensure that Labor was maintained in power in the event of a hung parliament. The quid pro quo was that he be guaranteed a ministry as Regional Development Minister. The deal was done. When the election was over and the Labor Party actually won, the deal was called up, and there was a degree of furor within the Labor caucus, which I can understand. Hence the deal to make him the minister was taken away and the speakership was given. Now, someone to say that what I've done by siding with one side of Parliament after an election is something like the greatest sin that's ever occurred, when we had a balanced process and made a choice based on some policies, some good for the electorate, but most importantly on was anybody capable of governing for the 3 years. For someone to say that that is trashing anything is offensive. And that's why I respect all of his family. I respect his right to stand. I respect his position as a Member of Parliament. I will always do that. But I have absolutely no respect for him as an individual, for what he's actually carried on with in terms of this particular process. One thing I'd just like to say, just in conclusion, probably on a more positive note, Gonski. Most of you have left school, but there's an issue next year coming up, which is about the review that David Gonski put in place about education. For the first time in my adult life, there's a funding process, and I'll simplify it, oversimplify it. There's a funding process which actually wipes out the public school fighting with the private school, with the religious school. And that's been there for years. The political parties have eaten off it. It creates a natural division. You know, King's School's getting this and our school's not. Gonski actually recommends a funding formula that wipes that out. And the reason it does that is that it actually developed a funding formula that follows the school students' needs more so than just giving each school a lump of money. I'm oversimplifying that, of course, but it is an incredible opportunity that this Parliament has next year. Now, there's a couple of things in its way. Wayne Swan's predilection with this surplus. So the Prime Minister, I think, feels a bit constrained with, because it does cost money. I've suggested that some of the other areas of funding, we should prioritise education and health far above everything else. And we've seen those international figures that have come out just recently in terms of where Australia sits. If we're serious about making an investment in infrastructure in this country, we've got to get serious about trying to wipe out some of the issues in terms of education. Country kids, country schools are the major beneficiaries of that sort of system, the major beneficiaries. And so I'd encourage you, when you do hear about it, think about it in that context, because I think there's an opportunity for both sides of Parliament to actually engage with this. The other thing that needs to happen is the states have got to be involved as well. And going into a federal election year that's all narrow-gutted as this one is, you can imagine the games that could be potentially played. The education, long-term education of our kids has got to be far more important than that. I'm sorry to have gone on a bit longer than I intended, but John, we might take some questions. Thank you.